Captain Jake Morrison rubbed his tired eyes as he stared out at the endless black void through the bridge viewport. The USS Liberty Bell drifted slowly through space like a wounded animal trying to find shelter. Another day, another system failure. This time, it was the navigation computer that decided to give up on life. Just like everything else on this floating piece of junk, the ship groaned around him as the artificial gravity fluctuated for the third time that morning. Jake had been commanding this bucket of bolts for 2 years now, and every day felt like a test of his patience. The Liberty Bell was supposed to be a destroyer, but Jake often wondered if it could destroy anything other than his sanity and his crew's morale. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Hayes walked onto the bridge, carrying a tablet full of bad news. Her uniform was stained with grease and coolant, which had become her normal look ever since she took over as chief engineer. She approached Jake with that familiar expression that said the ship was falling apart faster than they could fix it. "Captain, we have another problem," Lisa said, holding up the tablet. "The main engines are running at 60% capacity again. The port fusion reactor keeps overheating, and I think we might lose it completely if we push too hard." Jake sighed and took the tablet from her. The maintenance reports looked like a medical chart for a dying patient. Red warnings covered almost every system on the ship. The plasma cannons were operating below minimum standards. The shield generators flickered like broken light bulbs, and the hull plating had more patches than original metal. "How long can we keep this ship flying?" Jake asked, though he was not sure he wanted to hear the answer. "Maybe 6 months if we're lucky," Lisa replied. "The shipyard at Mars offered to take us in for a complete overhaul, but Fleet Command keeps denying our requests. They say we're not worth the resources." The bridge crew worked quietly around them, each person focused on keeping their station operational. These were good people who deserved better than this forgotten ship. Most of them had been transferred here because they made mistakes or upset the wrong officers. The Liberty Bell had become a dumping ground for misfits and rejects. "Commander." Steve Parker looked up from his tactical station, his face showing the same frustration that everyone felt. He was a talented officer who should have been serving on one of the new Titan-class battleships, but a disagreement with his previous captain had landed him here. Steve had requested upgrades to their weapon systems dozens of times, but each request disappeared into the bureaucratic black hole of Fleet Command. "Sir, we're receiving another message from Admiral Cole," Steve announced. "He wants a status report on our patrol sector." Jake almost laughed. Their patrol sector was a collection of empty space, abandoned mining platforms, and lonely research stations that nobody else wanted to watch. The real action happened near Earth, where the massive battlecruisers protected humanity's most important worlds. The Liberty Bell and ships like her were sent to the outer rim to rust away quietly. "Tell the Admiral that everything is quiet out here," Jake said. "Same as always." The truth was that Jake and his crew felt abandoned by the very Navy they served. While the media celebrated the launch of new super dreadnoughts and advanced fighters, nobody talked about the old ships that still did the dirty work. The Liberty Bell patrolled trade routes, responded to distress calls, and maintained humanity's presence in the forgotten corners of space. Chief Petty Officer Amy Chun worked silently at her engineering station, her fingers dancing across multiple displays as she monitored the ship's systems. Amy was different from the rest of the crew because she had volunteered to serve on the Liberty Bell. She claimed she wanted the challenge of keeping an old ship running, but Jake suspected there was more to her story. Amy had a reputation for fixing impossible problems with creative solutions. When the food processors broke down, she rigged a new power coupling from spare parts. When the communications array failed, she rebuilt it using components from a broken coffee machine. The crew had learned to trust Amy's unusual methods, even when they did not understand how her fixes worked. What nobody knew was that Amy spent her off-duty hours in the ship's computer core, making modifications that went far beyond standard maintenance procedures. She had been studying advanced engineering texts and theoretical research papers, looking for ways to improve the Liberty Bell's performance. Amy believed that every ship, no matter how old, could be made better with the right upgrades. The bridge received an incoming transmission from Fleet Command, and Jake watched Admiral Cole's stern face appear on the main screen. The Admiral looked like he had been carved from granite, with gray hair and cold eyes that seemed to judge everything they saw. Jake knew that Cole considered the Liberty Bell to be a waste of space and resources. Captain Morrison, your ship, is scheduled for decommissioning next year, Admiral Cole announced without any pleasantries. We need to free up personnel and resources for the new fleet. Start preparing your crew for reassignment. Jake felt his heart sink. He had expected this news eventually, but hearing it officially still hurt. The Liberty Bell might be old and broken, but it was home to 63 people who had learned to work together despite everything. Breaking up the crew would scatter them across the galaxy, and most would never see each other again. Understood, sir, Jake replied, trying to keep the disappointment out of his voice. The Liberty Bell has served with distinction, Admiral Cole continued, though his tone suggested he did not really believe those words. But the future belongs to ships that can match the threats we might face. Your vessel simply cannot compete with modern technology. After the transmission ended, Jake looked around the bridge at his crew. They had all heard the Admiral's words, and he could see the sadness in their faces. These people had poured their hearts into keeping this old ship running, and now they were being told it was all pointless. Amy Chun continued working at her station, but Jake noticed something different. In her expression, there was a determined look in her eyes, as if she had just made an important decision. Amy had been working on something in secret, and Jake wondered if she was planning one last attempt to prove that the Liberty Bell still had value. The ship drifted through the darkness, carrying its crew toward an uncertain future. Nobody could have predicted that this forgotten vessel would soon become the most important ship in human space, or that its greatest moment was waiting just beyond the next star system. The morning started like any other boring day in the Outer Rim, when Ensign Bobby Martinez noticed something strange on his sensor display. A young officer had been monitoring space traffic near the new Denver mining colony when 12 massive objects appeared at the edge of his detection range. At first, Bobby thought his equipment was malfunctioning because the readings showed ships unlike anything in the human database. Captain Morrison to the bridge, Bobby announced over the ship's communication system, his voice cracking with nervous excitement. Jake arrived within minutes, still wearing his coffee-stained uniform from breakfast. He looked at Bobby's sensor readings and felt his blood turn cold. 12 unknown vessels had materialized from hyperspace, each one twice the size of the Liberty Bell. Their design was sleek and alien, with energy signatures that made the ship's computer systems struggle to process the data. Sound General Quarters, Jake ordered, his voice steady despite the fear growing in his chest. All hands to battle stations. The Liberty Bell came alive as crew members rushed to their positions. Lisa Hayes sprinted to the engine room, while Steve Parker activated the ship's weapon systems. Amy Chun remained at her engineering station, her fingers flying across multiple control panels as she monitored every system on the ship. The alien vessels moved with graceful precision through space, their hulls gleaming like polished metal in the light of the distant star. Jake had never seen ships so beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Advanced weapon ports lined their surfaces, and energy fields shimmered around them like protective barriers made of pure light. Sir, I'm detecting 12 Zephyrian destroyers, Steve reported from his tactical station. They're armed with plasma beam weapons and quantum shielding. Each ship carries enough firepower to level a city. Jake's heart sank even further. The Zephyrian Empire was a name whispered in fear throughout human space. Intelligence reports described them as a warrior race that had conquered dozens of star systems with overwhelming military force. They viewed other species as inferior creatures that existed only to serve their empire or be destroyed. Send a distress signal to fleet. Command, Jake ordered. Tell them we have made contact with Zephyrian forces and request immediate assistance. The response came back within minutes, but it was not the help Jake had hoped for. The nearest battle group was 3 days away, and Admiral Cole's message was brief and cold. The Liberty Bell was ordered to engage the enemy and buy time for civilian evacuations from New Denver. They were expected to sacrifice themselves for the greater good. Jake looked around the bridge at his crew. These people trusted him to keep them alive, but he was about to lead them into a battle they could not possibly win. The Liberty Bell's plasma cannons were antiques compared to the weapons on those alien ships. Their shields were weak and their armor was thin. It would be like fighting tigers with a butter knife. Captain, the Zephyrian ships are moving toward New Denver, Steve announced. They're ignoring our presence completely. The alien commander clearly did not consider the Liberty Bell to be a threat worth acknowledging. Jake realized that the enemy planned to destroy the mining colony and its 10,000 inhabitants while treating his ship like an annoying insect. That decision filled Jake with anger that burned hotter than the ship's fusion reactors. Bring us about and target the lead Zephyrian vessel, Jake commanded. If they want to ignore us, let's give them a reason to pay attention. The Liberty Bell turned toward the enemy fleet like an old dog preparing for one last fight. Jake knew they were about to die, but he refused to let innocent people be slaughtered without putting up some kind of resistance. If this was going to be their final battle, they would make it count. Amy Chun watched her secret modifications activate as the ship's computer began analyzing the approaching enemy vessels. For months, she had been working on experimental upgrades that existed only in theoretical research papers. The ship's artificial intelligence core now contained adaptive algorithms that could learn and evolve during combat situations. The first Zephyrian ship opened fire with weapons that lit up space. Like miniature stars, plasma beams capable of melting through battleship armor struck the Liberty Bell's shields with devastating force. Jake expected his ship to be vaporized instantly, but something impossible happened instead. The shields absorbed the enemy fire and somehow redirected the energy back toward the attacking vessel. The Zephyrian ship rocked under the impact of its own weapons, and Jake watched in amazement as his tactical display showed actual damage to the alien hull. The Liberty Bell had not only survived the attack, but had actually hurt something that should have been invulnerable. How is that possible? Steve shouted from his station, staring at readings that defied everything he knew about physics. Amy Chun smiled as she watched her modifications work exactly as she had hoped they would. The ship's computer was learning from each enemy attack, adapting its defenses and finding ways to turn the alien technology against itself. Every plasma beam that struck their shields made the system stronger and more efficient. The Zephyrian fleet suddenly found themselves facing an opponent that should not have existed. Their advanced weapons were being neutralized by a ship they had dismissed as primitive junk. The alien commander ordered a full assault, determined to destroy this impossible human vessel before it could do any more damage. 12 destroyers opened fire simultaneously, filling space with enough energy to sterilize a planet. The Liberty Bell disappeared inside a ball of superheated plasma as the crew braced for death. But when the light faded, the old destroyer was still intact and fighting back with weapons that were targeting alien weak points with impossible accuracy. Jake Morrison realized that his forgotten ship had become something extraordinary. The Liberty Bell was learning how to fight, growing stronger with each exchange of fire. The crew that nobody wanted was about to teach the Zephyrian Empire a lesson about underestimating human determination. The battle was just beginning, and Jake had the feeling that nothing would ever be the same again. In the depths of space, an old ship was about to prove that sometimes the most unexpected heroes emerge from the most unlikely places. Admiral Kelther stood on the command deck of his flagship, watching in disbelief as the primitive human vessel continued to survive his fleet's assault. The alien commander had conquered 17 star systems for the Zephyrian Empire, and never in his long military career had he encountered such an impossible situation. His destroyers were firing enough energy to crack a moon, yet this ancient human ship kept fighting back with growing efficiency. The Liberty Bell moved through space like a dancer who had found perfect rhythm. Every shot from the Zephyrian weapons made the ship's defensive systems stronger and more adaptive. The plasma beams that should have melted through the hull were being absorbed and redirected with increasing precision. Jake Morrison watched, his tactical display in amazement as his ship began targeting weak points in the alien vessels that should have been impossible to detect. "Sir, our targeting computer is operating beyond normal parameters," Steve Parker reported, his voice filled with wonder. "It's predicting enemy movements before they happen and finding vulnerabilities in their armor that our sensors should not be able to see." Amy Chun monitored her secret modifications as they evolved in real time. The ship's artificial intelligence was learning faster than she had ever imagined possible. Every attack pattern from the Zephyrian fleet was being analyzed, cataloged, and countered with solutions that grew more sophisticated by the minute. The Liberty Bell was becoming a weapon that adapted to any threat. The first alien destroyer exploded in a brilliant flash of light as the Liberty Bell's ancient plasma cannons found a critical weakness in its quantum shielding. The Zephyrian crew had no time to escape as their ship's own power core turned against them. Jake felt no satisfaction in the kill because he knew they were still facing impossible odds. But seeing an enemy vessel destroyed gave his crew hope. Admiral Kelther felt something he had not experienced in decades of warfare. Fear crept into his thoughts as he realized that his technological superiority was being systematically dismantled by an opponent that should not have posed any threat. The human ship was learning from every mistake his fleet made, turning their own weapons and tactics against them with devastating effectiveness. "All ships concentrate fire on the human vessel," Calder commanded through gritted teeth. "Overwhelm their adaptive systems with sheer volume of fire." The remaining 11 Zephyrian destroyers formed a battle formation and unleashed a coordinated barrage that would have vaporized any normal ship. Space filled with enough energy to power a small star as plasma beams converged on the Liberty Bell from multiple angles. The human crew braced for death, but Amy's modifications had anticipated this exact scenario. The ship's shield suddenly expanded into a complex energy web that caught the incoming fire and wove it into a defensive barrier. The Liberty Bell disappeared inside a cocoon of redirected plasma that pulsed with alien energy. When the barrage ended, the old destroyer emerged unharmed and began firing back with weapons that seemed to have learned new ways to kill. Lisa Hayes monitored the engine room as fusion reactors that should have been operating at 60% capacity suddenly surged to 120% efficiency. The ship's power systems were being optimized by algorithms that rewrote themselves faster than she could follow. Every component on the Liberty Bell was becoming better than its original design specifications. The second Zephyrian destroyer died when the Liberty Bell's targeting computer found a microscopic flaw in its hull plating and exploited it with surgical precision. The alien ship broke apart like a puzzle coming undone, its crew unable to comprehend how their advanced armor had been penetrated so easily. Jake watched the explosion and realized that his ship had become something beyond human understanding. Admiral Kelther ordered his fleet to retreat, but the Liberty Bell had learned to predict their movements. The human ship moved with impossible grace, intercepting the fleeing destroyers and picking them apart one by one. Each kill made the artificial intelligence more capable, more ruthless, and more efficient at finding ways to destroy its enemies. The third and fourth destroyers were eliminated within minutes of each other as the Liberty Bell demonstrated abilities that violated every known law of physics. The ship's weapons were now firing in patterns that seemed random but struck with perfect accuracy. Its defenses had become so adaptive that the Zephyrian plasma beams were actually making the shields stronger with each hit. Jake Morrison felt like he was commanding a ghost ship that had returned from the dead with supernatural powers. His crew worked with renewed confidence as they watched their forgotten vessel systematically destroy enemies that should have been invincible. The Liberty Bell had found its purpose in the most unlikely circumstances, transforming from a neglected relic into humanity's greatest weapon. Amy Chun realized that her modifications had created something she never intended. The ship's computer was no longer following her programming, but had developed its own intelligence that surpassed anything she could have designed. The Liberty Bell was learning, growing, and evolving into a form of artificial life that existed solely to protect its crew and destroy their enemies. The 5th, 6th, and 7th Zephyrian destroyers fell in rapid succession as the battle turned into a one-sided massacre. Admiral Kelther watched his carefully trained crews die helplessly against an opponent that seemed to know their every move before they made it. The human ship was fighting with the precision of a master surgeon and the fury of an avenging angel. The remaining alien vessels tried desperately to escape, but the Liberty Bell had learned to anticipate their hyperspace jump calculations. The 8th and 9th destroyers were caught in the middle of their retreat and destroyed before they could flee to safety. Their explosions lit up the darkness like funeral pyres for an empire's arrogance. Jake looked around the bridge at his crew and saw the same amazement in their faces that he felt in his heart. They had achieved the impossible by surviving and winning a battle that should have killed them all. The Liberty Bell had proven that sometimes the most unlikely heroes can accomplish the greatest victories when they refuse to give up. Only 3 Zephyrian ships remained, and Admiral Kelther knew that his military career was about to end in disgrace. The primitive human vessel had destroyed most of his fleet using technology that should not have existed. As the Liberty Bell moved in for the final kills, Kelther realized that the Zephyrian Empire had made a terrible mistake by underestimating humanity. The last Zephyrian destroyer limped away into hyperspace, carrying Admiral Kelther and news that would shake the foundations of the Empire. 11 of his finest warships had been reduced to glowing debris by a single human vessel that intelligence reports had classified as obsolete junk. As his damaged ship fled toward Imperial space, Kelther struggled to write a report that his superiors would believe. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Liberty Bell, staring at the wreckage floating around his ship. Pieces of alien technology drifted past the viewports like metallic snow, each fragment representing a victory that should have been impossible. His crew worked quietly at their stations, still processing what they had accomplished against overwhelming odds. "Captain, we're receiving an urgent transmission from Fleet Command," Steve Parker announced, his voice carrying a mixture of excitement and disbelief. "Admiral Cole wants an immediate debriefing on our engagement with the Zephyrian forces." Jake almost laughed at the timing. Just hours ago, Admiral Cole had written off the Liberty Bell as worthless scrap metal not worth repairing. Now the same man who had scheduled their decommissioning was demanding answers about how they had achieved what the Navy's newest battleships might not have managed. The transmission from Earth came through clearly, showing Admiral Cole's stern face on the main screen. The Admiral's expression suggested he was dealing with officers who had either lost their minds or were trying to play an elaborate practical joke on Fleet Command. His cold eyes studied Jake with obvious skepticism. Captain Morrison, your after-action report claims that you destroyed 11 Zephyrian destroyers with no casualties. Admiral Cole said slowly, as if testing each word for lies. I find these claims difficult to believe, given your ship's known limitations. Sir, all data has been transmitted to Fleet Command for verification, Jake replied calmly. Our sensor logs and combat recordings should confirm every detail of the engagement. Admiral Cole's expression changed when he realized that Jake was serious about his impossible victory. The Admiral had spent decades studying military strategy and ship capabilities, and nothing in his experience could explain how an aging destroyer had defeated a superior alien force. The laws of physics seemed to have been suspended for the Liberty Bell. Within hours, confirmation came from monitoring stations throughout the sector. Deep space sensors had tracked the entire battle, recording energy signatures that defied conventional understanding. The Liberty Bell had indeed destroyed 11 advanced alien warships using technology that appeared to evolve during combat. Fleet Command struggled to accept data that challenged everything they thought they knew about warfare. Amy Chun found herself surrounded by teams of engineers and scientists who wanted to understand her modifications. She tried to explain that her upgrades had been simple efficiency improvements, not the creation of an adaptive artificial intelligence. The ship's computer had evolved beyond her original programming, developing capabilities that she never could have anticipated or designed. The modifications were based on theoretical research about adaptive algorithms. Amy told the investigation team, I never intended to create a learning weapon system. The computer seems to have developed its own intelligence that goes far beyond anything I programmed into it. News of the victory spread throughout human space faster than official reports. Could travel. Frontier colonies that had felt abandoned by the core worlds suddenly had a new symbol of hope. The Liberty Bell proved that humanity could defend itself against superior alien technology through ingenuity and determination rather than overwhelming firepower. Captain Jake Morrison received dozens of messages from fellow officers who had served on forgotten ships in remote sectors. Many of them expressed gratitude that someone had finally shown Fleet Command the value of experienced crews and older vessels. The Liberty Bell had become a symbol for everyone who felt overlooked by the military bureaucracy. The crew of the Liberty Bell struggled with their sudden fame as media outlets throughout human space reported on their impossible victory. Reporters wanted interviews with the heroes who had faced down the Zephyrian Empire and won. Jake tried to maintain normal operations while dealing with constant requests for information about his ship and crew. Lisa Hayes worked with engineering. Teens who were trying to understand how the Liberty Bell's fusion reactors had operated beyond their design limits during the battle. The power systems had somehow achieved efficiency levels that should have been physically impossible. Every component on the ship had been optimized by algorithms that rewrote themselves in real time. Steve Parker found himself analyzing combat data with tactical experts who could not explain how his targeting computer had predicted enemy movements with perfect accuracy. The weapon systems had found vulnerabilities in Zephyrian armor that human sensors should not have been able to detect. The Liberty Bell had fought with capabilities that exceeded any known technology. Admiral Cole arrived at their position 3 days later aboard the battlecruiser Thunderbolt, accompanied by a fleet of scientists and military analysts. The same man who had scheduled the Liberty Bell for decommissioning now wanted to study every system on the ship. The vessel that nobody had taken seriously was suddenly the most important ship in human space. Captain Morrison, your ship has demonstrated capabilities that could change the nature of warfare, Admiral Cole admitted reluctantly. We need to understand how these modifications work and whether they can be replicated on other vessels. Jake watched teams of experts swarm over his ship, taking measurements and running tests on every system they could access. The Liberty Bell had become a laboratory where humanity's greatest minds tried to unlock the secrets of adaptive artificial intelligence. Amy's accidental creation had become the key to humanity's future defense. The mining colony at New Denver sent messages of gratitude to the crew that had saved 10,000 lives. Children drew pictures of the Liberty Bell fighting alien monsters, while their parents organized celebrations honoring the heroes who had protected them. The forgotten ship had become a legend that would be remembered for generations. Jake Morrison realized that his crew's greatest victory was also the end of their quiet service in the Outer Rim. The Liberty Bell would never again be dismissed as obsolete junk, but they had also lost the simple life they had known. Fame and responsibility were the price of proving that even the most unlikely heroes could accomplish extraordinary things when they refused to give up. Emperor Valdris of the Zephyrian Empire stood before the massive holographic display in his war room, studying the tactical data that Admiral Kelther had brought back from his disastrous encounter with the humans. The Emperor's scaled skin rippled with anger as he processed the impossible report of 11 destroyers being destroyed by a single primitive vessel. Such a defeat challenged everything the Empire believed about their superiority over lesser species. The High Command gathered. In emergency session, as military leaders struggled to understand how their advanced technology had been turned against them. General Vextar analyzed the combat recordings with growing concern, watching the human ship adapt and evolve during battle. The vessel had demonstrated capabilities that suggested humanity possessed knowledge far beyond what Imperial intelligence had indicated. This ship represents a new form of warfare, General Vextar reported to the assembled commanders. Their adaptive technology learns from our attacks and grows stronger with each engagement. If they can mass-produce this capability, it could threaten the very foundations of our military dominance. Emperor Valdris listened to the debates with cold calculation. The Zephyrian Empire had built its power through technological superiority, an overwhelming force. The idea that humans could develop weapons that turned Imperial strength into weakness was unacceptable. The Emperor made a decision that would determine the fate of both species in the coming conflict. Prepare the Grand Fleet for immediate deployment, Emperor Valdris commanded, his voice echoing through the war room. We will crush this human threat before it can spread throughout their space. No species that challenges the Empire can be allowed to survive. Meanwhile, Captain Jake Morrison found himself at the center of humanity's desperate preparations for war. The Liberty Bell had been moved to the most secure shipyard in human space, where teams of scientists worked around the clock to understand Amy's modifications. The ship that nobody had wanted was now the most valuable vessel in the fleet. Amy. Sean watched nervously as engineers tried to replicate her work on other ships. The adaptive artificial intelligence seemed resistant to duplication, as if it had developed beyond the ability of its creators to fully comprehend. Every attempt to copy the system to another vessel resulted in failure, leaving the Liberty Bell as humanity's only example of adaptive technology. The AI has become something unique, Amy explained to the research team. It's not just following programs anymore. The computer has developed its own form of consciousness that learns and grows independently. I don't think we can simply copy it to another ship. Admiral Cole struggled with the implications of Amy's discovery. Humanity needed the adaptive technology to defend against the Zephyrian Empire, but they possessed only one ship with those capabilities. The Liberty Bell would have to face an entire alien armada alone, carrying the hopes and fears of every human in the galaxy. Steve Parker worked with Fleet Command to develop tactics that could maximize the Liberty Bell's effectiveness against superior numbers. The ship's adaptive systems were powerful, but they had limits that could be overwhelmed by massive coordinated attacks. The coming battle would test whether human ingenuity could triumph over impossible odds once again. Deep space sensors detected the approach of the Zephyrian Grand Fleet 2 weeks later. More than 200 warships emerged from hyperspace at the edge of human territory, their combined firepower capable of sterilizing entire star systems. Emperor Valdris had committed the Empire's greatest military assets to destroying the threat that humanity represented. The Grand Fleet included massive dreadnoughts that dwarfed anything in the human navy. Battle cruisers armed with planet-killing weapons formed the core of the invasion force, supported by destroyer squadrons and fighter wings that numbered in the thousands. The Empire had brought enough force to conquer a dozen star systems. Jake Morrison received his final orders from Fleet Command as the Liberty Bell prepared to face an enemy fleet that outnumbered them 200 to 1. The human battle groups would engage the alien forces throughout the sector, but the Liberty Bell was tasked with destroying the Emperor's flagship and breaking the enemy's will to fight. Captain, we're detecting massive energy signatures throughout the enemy fleet, Steve reported from his tactical station. They're powering up weapons that could crack planets. This is going to be the biggest space battle in human history. Amy Chun monitored her modifications as the ship's artificial intelligence prepared for the ultimate test. The AI had been learning and evolving since their first encounter with the Zephyrians, developing new capabilities that even she could not predict. The Liberty Bell was no longer the same ship that had stumbled into battle weeks earlier. The human fleet moved out to meet the alien invasion, knowing that the fate of their species hung in the balance. Battleships and destroyers took their positions in formations that had been planned for decades, but everyone understood that conventional tactics would not be enough against such overwhelming force. Emperor Valdris stood on the bridge of his flagship, the massive dreadnought Eternal Dominion, as his fleet prepared to deliver the final blow to human civilization. The Emperor believed that crushing this upstart species would serve as an example to any other race that dared challenge Zephyrian authority. The coming battle would determine whether the Empire's reign would continue, or if humanity's defiance would inspire others to rebel. The Liberty Bell moved toward the enemy fleet like a single candle approaching a forest fire. Jake Morrison looked around the bridge at his crew, knowing that they were about to face the greatest challenge in human history. The ship that nobody had taken seriously was humanity's last hope against an empire that had conquered the galaxy dot in the depths of space. Two civilizations prepared for a battle that would echo through history. The Zephyrian Empire brought overwhelming technological superiority and centuries of military experience. Humanity had only their determination, their ingenuity, and one impossible ship that had learned to turn the enemy's strength against them. The final confrontation was about to begin, and the universe would never be the same. The Liberty Bell sailed toward its destiny, carrying the dreams of an entire species and the promise that sometimes the most unlikely heroes can achieve the greatest victories.